Hi, everyone. Welcome to what I think is one of the most important chapters in counseling psychology. And you'll recall that we talked about how career counseling is one of the really the founders of counseling psychology. And that's largely why I think it's one of the most important. Plus, the fact that we tend to do a lot of career counseling and counseling. So before we get started with this, first of all, take a look at this little cartoon here. What I'd like for you to do is change everything about yourself and get back to me. That's from personnel. So that's probably not very helpful career counseling kind of advice. What I'd like to do is have you think about a couple of questions before we get started. And of course, if we were together as a class, we'd be having a really fun discussion about this because this chapter always brings about fun discussions. And here are the questions that I want you to think about. No, I guess I should start the show here. Okay, so think about what your career goals were growing up. What did you want to be? And so I'll start off. I at times wanted to be an astronaut. And for a while, I wanted to be a flight attendant because when I was little, flying was a really big deal. It's not like it is now. It was very glamorous. It was exciting. And then I learned that somewhere along the way, 6th, 7th grade, I had already surpassed the height limit for a flight attendant. I don't know if you knew that like 5'10", I think is the limit, 5'11" maybe, and I'm taller than that. So yeah, that went out the window. And then I decided pretty early on that I wanted to go into psychology. And in my weekly video that I posted a couple days ago, I mentioned this. I'm going to tell you guys a little bit more about it because some of you have asked questions about career choice in psychology and how did I know. And the truth was that I was a pretty anxious kid. I was never diagnosed with an anxiety disorder, although I probably could have been diagnosed with generalized anxiety disorder. And to this day, I tend to be a little higher on the worry and anxiety scale than some people. And I manage it fine. You know, it's generally not an issue, but I'm a worrier and I admit to that. So, but when I was younger, it was worse and it manifested as some hypochondria. And so I would be afraid of getting sick and afraid of poisons and things. And at one point, I was really afraid that something was going to happen with my eyes. And my mom, you know, this was in the 70s. She wasn't sure what to do. Child psychiatry and psychology wasn't like it is now. But she took me to a counselor on the recommendation of the doctor. And one session with the counselor made a huge deal to me. So I don't know if it was the reassurance that I got or whether it was having a professional, somebody I really believed had some knowledge telling me that, you know, these things weren't going to hurt me, etc. But it made a huge difference. And I decided at that moment that that's what I wanted to do. And I have never wavered from that, honestly. I love psychology. I have found that I love teaching a little bit more than counseling. It suits my personality, I think, a little bit better. I do love counseling. I do, make no mistake. But so that's how I decided on psychology. So when I think about those early goals, you know, the flight attendant and the astronaut, but the question is for you, how do you feel about that? And then how do you think your current career goals have been influenced by any jobs that you've held thus far? So think about that. And again, I'll give you just a real quick example for me. I worked at McDonald's for a number of years in high school. And what I learned is that I want a job where I don't have a supervisor looking over my shoulder all the time, which I have a job with tremendous freedom, just tremendous, and I love it. I also want a job that doesn't involve customer service and doesn't involve coming home and feeling like I need to take a shower and wash my clothes immediately because I smell. So think about that. And yours may be more substantial. Maybe you have realized you just love teaching others, or you don't want a job working with the public, etc. So in this discussion of career counseling, I just want you to think about how your own career goals have been influenced and what those have been influenced by. And then if we were together, the next question I would ask is anybody interested in maybe doing career counseling? Maybe. And if the answer is typical in previous years, either no one raises their hand or maybe one or two people raise their hand. And then I ask why. So those of you, and it's the majority of you who probably said, no, I'm not interested, think about why. Generally, when I ask this question, the answers I get are, it sounds boring, I want something more interesting. It generally runs along the lines that career counseling isn't sexy, it's not exciting, it's not mental illness. That's something really interesting, and career counseling just sounds dry and boring. That's how most people think. So when we're through with this chapter, I'm hoping I will have convinced you a little bit differently. Maybe I'm not going to talk anybody into wanting to do career counseling, but I hope you'll have a different image of it. So let's start off with what it is, what the definition is. So career counseling is a type of counseling that's embedded in regular counseling, or it can be a separate service to help people make good decisions about work and cope with problems arising during their work or during their career. Sometimes career counseling is done on site if it's a large company. So you take some of the large corporations in the United States, and they may actually offer career counseling. There are people who do specifically career counseling for a living. And as we're going to see in this chapter, they see everything under the sun. They see people who are mid-career and decide they need a switch. They do a lot of career counseling for college students. I don't know if you all know that Muskingum offers career counseling. You can call the regular counseling center and see, but generally over where Jackie Vascura is, that's the kind of services that they help. They can administer tests, which we'll talk about. They can talk with you, and really all of the faculty do some career counseling too. So that's really part of our job. All right, now we'll find out more about that, but I want to define a couple of definitions and terms here that sometimes are used overlapping, and I just want to make sure we're all on the same page about it. So for example, occupation. Lots of times when you fill out forms, it asks for your occupation. Your occupation is jobs, generally a genre of jobs that are similar that you hold across different organizations. So for me, I say that my occupation is either counselor or teacher. I do both. Some people might say clerical, secretary. Other people might say law. People might say healthcare. So essentially, it's a broad-based term that involves similar jobs that people hold. Now that is that's similar to career, a little bit different. So career are work-related roles that you've held across the lifespan. Occupation's the broadest term, and then career is a little bit more narrow. You all are in your career right now. I don't know if you realize that, but student-oriented activities are career. You're taking psychology classes, or you're taking healthcare classes, or whatever it is. So you are absolutely in your career. So this can include being a student, any kind of staff positions, volunteer. If you volunteer with kids or big brothers or big sisters, something like that, that would be considered career if you want to go into a similar area. Avocational, if you, just as one of your hobbies, you coach a kids team, and you want to work with kids eventually in your career, that is your career. So sometimes students like hearing that they are in their career, and you absolutely are right now. And then we can contrast this with vocation. You don't hear that term very much. You usually hear occupation or job or profession, but vocation is kind of the psychological part of our careers or our occupation. It has psychological meaning. It includes tasks, but essentially it's what are you drawn to? So for example, teaching could be a vocation. Now you notice that could also be an occupation, but vocation has that psychological meaning to it. It might be information. So if you're in IT, information is your vocation. So really, where does your heart lie? Okay, so just to give you a little bit of background history on career counseling, just a tiny bit, because I know we've talked about this to some degree. The need for counseling and career counseling grew specifically the most after World War II because of the GI Bill, and we had a lot of soldiers coming back who were going to go to college and they didn't know what they wanted to do. So World War II really created a need within the VA system and also within college campuses for career counselors to help these soldiers. So the importance of careful planning is increasing, especially with higher education. Now, prior to the 1940s, any kind of career counseling that went on used something called this test and tell mentality. In other words, I'll give you a test and then I'm going to tell you what career you're best fit for. And some people think that's still what it involves, that you're going to take a bunch of tests and it's going to tell you what you should do. Okay, well, let me tell you a story. I've taken all the career tests over my career, and a number of them say that I'd be a hairdresser. Not because I do a good job with my hair, but because my personality is apparently similar to those of many hairdressers. But I'm not a hairdresser. I'm never going to be a hairdresser. So the idea of a test telling you what you should be is really faulty, but it used to be that was the way it was. But then Carl Rogers came along in the 50s, the 60s, and this is after the 1940s. And so the emphasis on assuming the counselor knows best went out the window. Rogers was the one to tell us clients know themselves the best. Let's see what it is they want to do. So there began groups, self-help books, using computers to match people to careers. So there's a big difference between pre-1940 and post-1940. So the way that we're going to frame this discussion is by first starting to look at two misconceptions that people have about career counseling, and maybe these are things that you've believed also. Let me list them here and then we'll talk about each of them separately. The first one is that career counseling is different from personal counseling, that it's a completely different kind of counseling altogether. We'll talk about that. And number two is that career counseling is rational, it's non-emotional, it's dry, it's not exciting, you don't deal with feelings. So that's the second one we're going to talk about. All right, let's address the first one. Career counseling is not personal counseling. What I'm going to do here is make a case for you that career counseling is in fact personal counseling. So we'll address the first one. Career counseling and personal counseling are different. Okay, so I just want to give you some information to help make this point. And the first one is, what kinds of things do you talk about in career counseling? The first issue that we talk to clients about is career choice. So that could be choice of major, it could be choice of career, and your choices, of course, become more specific as your career advances. So when you start to college, you know, okay, I want to major in education or I want to major in political science or history. You might not necessarily know what you want to do with it at that point, but by the time you're a senior, you probably have a better idea. And then you can choose different practica, you can choose different internships to become involved in that. We also discuss with clients career implementation, and this is really you're still in this as well. It's the education and the training that you get to implement your career choices. And it doesn't end just because you graduate from college, because you may go on to internships or fellowships, other kinds of training opportunities before you settle in a job. And then one last issue we talk about in career counseling is career adjustment. There is such a thing as career satisfaction and satisfactoriness. So career satisfaction is like it sounds. Are you satisfied in your career? Are you happy with your career choice? Satisfactory asks, how well are you doing? You might have a career that you don't like, but you're doing really well in. Or conversely, you might have a career that you really like, but you're not doing so well in. So obviously, clearly, we want both of those to happen. Now, these stages tend to cycle throughout the lifespan. So you might feel like, okay, I'm going through choice and implementation now, and the rest of my life will be adjustment and beyond. That's not always the case. There's evidence that people change jobs multiple times in their life, and a lot of people actually change careers. So if you change careers, that may involve going back to step number one, career choice, and that's something that a career counselor certainly could help you with. As an example, I went to graduate school with a woman, so she was getting a PhD in counseling psychology, and she actually, when she graduated from college, she had majored in political science and went to law school. So she got her law degree, passed the bar, just such a smart woman, and then spent like 5 or 10 years in the Attorney General's office, hated it, realized law was not for her, did some career counseling, realized that this is what she wanted to do, and then she came back and got a PhD in counseling psychology. And she practiced for a while, and now she is a dean at Virginia Commonwealth. So yeah, so that happens. Those stages certainly can cycle for many years. Some more evidence that in fact career counseling is very much personal counseling is that you absolutely have to build a therapeutic alliance in career counseling. The same as in personal counseling. You have to build up that trust, that working relationship, and actually clients will oftentimes come to counseling and they'll use career counseling because career issues are safe. It's a way of getting them in the door, but it always, there are personal issues that are involved in career counseling. So a way to think about it is that career counseling is personal counseling with career issues involved. So career counseling is the same as personal counseling with career issues involved, because you are counseling the whole person. You're not just counseling just the career part of them or just the personal part of them. So there are lots of different issues that we can explore in career counseling with clients, and they very much border on personal issues. So CC is career counseling. Here are some of the topics that we explore. We always talk about self-image and self-esteem, and this is one of the big issues that are involved when people are trying to maybe pick a career or change a career. They may feel like they just don't have the ability to do it, or they're feeling confined, or something like that. There's always going to be something going on as far as that's concerned. You may want to talk about lifestyle and leisure kinds of issues. So if they've got a hobby that's really important to them, or they like a lot of vacation time or a lot of travel time, that's something to think about when you're helping people decide on career issues. Academic likes and dislikes. I mean, we have plenty of people who say things like they want to go to medical school or they want to become a veterinarian, but they don't like science or they don't like math. Yeah, that's probably not going to work so well. So think about the things that you like in college are probably going to do a good job of pointing you toward a career. Family expectations. Okay, so this is something that you sometimes have to work with. Those of you majoring in psychology or an art, say theater or the arts or English, something along those lines, you may have gotten a little pushback from your family. Hopefully not, but it certainly may happen because families worry about those kinds of jobs. What are you going to do with your career? Are we going to spend a lot of money on college, and are you going to be able to get a job? So that's fair. That's really fair. Look at your work history, and as I just talked about, the kinds of jobs that you've had and liked and disliked say a lot about the kinds of careers. So it's really important to talk with clients about what kinds of jobs they've had and how those have gone. And then certainly personal likes and dislikes. You know, as an example, I'm an introvert. I love a job where I get enough alone time. So, and really with teaching, I do that. I mean, I'm meeting with people all day, but I also have an office that I can go to and close my door and take lunch for a half an hour, and I kind of get to go back and collect my thoughts a bit in between. So think about, do you want a structured environment? Do you want an unstructured environment? You know, as I mentioned to you, I don't have a supervisor looking over my shoulder. I have a lot of freedom. All those are important topics. So the bottom line from this lesson, and I already said this, but here it is that career counseling is personal counseling with career issues involved. So it is not dry. It's not totally separate from personal counseling. Okay, misconception number 2, let's talk about this, is that career counseling is non-emotional. This is wrong because we absolutely have to attend to emotions in career. Career choice and career is a lifelong process. So we help people assess themselves and give them access to career information. No matter what you think about Freud, and this is one of my favorite pictures of Freud. He's much older. This is more towards the end of his life, but he just looks contemplative. It's just a good picture of him. No matter what you think about Freud, he said one good thing, and that is we need work and we need love. And if you think about it, those are the two huge components in our life. We need work that's meaningful and that we like, and we need people who love us and to be able to love them back. So for our lives to be really happy and balanced, we absolutely need to have both of those. So one of the things that people will come in with, and this kind of helps lead to this message that career counseling is emotional, are some of the misconceptions that clients have about careers. So people come in with ideas about careers and jobs that as a career counselor you may need to deal with. For example, there is one right choice. One right choice. Career decisions are rational choices. Now, if people believe that, they're going to have a hard time making a decision, because making a decision is risky. It means cutting off all the other options. So if you believe that, that's going to be really hard for you to make decisions about things. The truth is, that's not the truth. Just like there are multiple people that you could be happy with as far as marriage and partnerships, there are more than one career that you would be happy with. So if people feel like, they're going to make the best choice available to them right now, and if it's the wrong thing, then you may have to make some changes, but you can certainly do that. So helping steer clients away from the idea that they have to make the right choice. That's one of the things I notice about first-year students coming in. You know how when you're a first year and you're going to all these get-togethers and get-to-know-yous, and that's kind of how people identify themselves. What are you majoring in? What are you thinking about doing? It's a label, And I think there's pressure to do that. And if you are we don't call them undecided, we call them exploring student, you may feel kind of left out or adrift. But I really encourage students, if you don't feel compelled to declare your first year, don't. Take a bunch of classes, see what you like. Don't be in a hurry to pick something. Not that you can't change, because you certainly can, but there's lots of options available to you. Now, along with that, there is pressure that clients have to make a good decision, because they think that leads to happily ever after. So if I make the right choice, that one right choice, then my life will be great. Well, that's also not necessarily the case. And then clients sometimes will come in asking for tests, believing that tests are magical. They hold the answer to that right decision. So many times that 1, 2, and 3 misconceptions that I just went over oftentimes will go together. And tests also allow clients to avoid taking responsibility. So for example, if a test tells them to go into engineering and then they end up not liking it, they don't have to take responsibility for that. It's like, okay, well, the test steered me wrong, so now I have to figure out what to do all over again, and that's really an issue. So the way we use tests, this is a good way to say this, is we use tests in an exploratory, not a confirmatory manner. So we don't use tests to tell us what to pick. We use it to give us options. So you take a test, and we'll be talking about one here just in a minute. You take a test and it tells you that you are compatible with a social science field, a teaching or a ministry or a counseling or social work, something along those lines. Well, that gives you some options to choose from. But if you're thinking about a social science field, don't use that test as saying, see, this test says this is what I should do. So don't use it to confirm your choice or select your choice, but use it to explore your choices. Now, I want to talk for a minute about why people are undecided. So again, if we were together in a class, I'd be asking you this question, because my guess is quite a few of you, when you came into Muskingum, you were undecided. You were exploring, and I'd be curious as to why. Your answers most likely will be things like, there were so many options, I just couldn't decide. Some of you might say, I didn't really know what was available to me. And all those are absolutely valid. So some of the reasons people are undecided are, number one, they may lack confidence in making a decision. Maybe they've never had to make a really big decision in their life, and this just seems huge. And if you couple it with the idea that there's only one right decision, you better get it right the first time, that's a lot of pressure. Some people are undecided because of external barriers. So maybe their family is pressuring them to take over the family business, and they don't really want to, but they're thinking maybe they should think about that or give that a possibility, or their family is pressuring them to pick up a particular major. Maybe they really want to go to medical school or veterinary school, but just don't have the science chops to do that. Certainly not everybody does. Maybe there's a money factor. Maybe, again, you want to go to a field that requires graduate education, and you know that really what's best for you is to get your degree and get a job. So there are all kinds of external barriers. Sometimes people are undecided because of what we call an approach issue. Everything looks good. I like this idea, and I like this idea, and I like this idea. I remember about 15 years ago at Muskingum, I had an advisee, And this it was the nicest guy ever, and he literally had 6 majors. Now, I think we have rules about that now, but they were all over the board. They were math and English and psychology, and of course it took him quite a few years to get through Muskingum, but when he went to apply to graduate school, he really didn't know what he wanted to do. So he applied to graduate schools in several of those different areas just to see what stuck. And no place ended up taking him because, the letters and the statements that you have to write for graduate school, they really expect you to be pretty specific and focused on what you want to do. And he just wasn't. So I think for somebody like him, it's okay to take a little extra time in college. You don't have to major in many things to be qualified, though. So he could have benefited. He had several of us advising him, and he just refused to narrow down. But I will never forget that guy. Okay, and then the last reason here why people are undecided is because of personal conflict. So this sometimes can come along with the first one. Many people rely on an external locus of control. They don't want to make that decision. So they're looking for somebody to tell them what they should do. And that can certainly lead to some problems. Okay, well, now that we have some of the issues underway, and I've hopefully convinced you that career counseling is personal counseling, and it's not just a dry and rational kind of unemotional field, let's talk about 2 theories of career counseling. And the first one we'll talk about is Holland's matching model. Now, this is actually a really interesting, I know when you hear the word theory, you have a tendency to roll your eyes, but this one is really interesting. I think I mentioned in an earlier talk that, the old way of picking your career in the early 1900s, late 1800s, is that you really didn't pick your career. You took over the family business, or if you were a woman, you became a teacher or a seamstress, but really no career was best. It was better for you to get married and have kids. Or you just worked at the factory in town. But now, with the Industrial Revolution and everything that's happened since then, there are lots more choices available to kids. So, Holland's matching model, that man is John Holland. He is deceased. He's one of the most famous counseling psychologists. He died a few years ago, not too long ago. And I actually had occasion to meet him maybe 20 years ago or so at one of the big psychology conventions. And so I was with a friend from graduate school, and we were standing there talking to one of our professors. And this older man walked up to us and started talking to our professor. And our professor turned to us and said, "Dinah and my friend, I'd like you to meet John Holland." And it was him. And it was like meeting a celebrity. It was, for psychology students, oh my gosh, one of the great psychologists. And we were just starstruck and stammering. And, what do you say to this giant in psychology? And, what do you say? "I like your theory." It just, it was, okay, I need to just move on here. My starstruck moment. Well, let's talk about Holland and his theory. Okay. Pretty basic, makes a lot of intuitive sense, but for whatever reason it wasn't used until, the 1970s or so. The idea behind Holland's theory is that you start with self-knowledge. You understand what do you like to do and what are you good at. So get a good understanding of your abilities and your interests. Then you find out information about jobs. What do jobs require? What kind of interests? What kind of talents? And then, amazing, you match them up. You find a job that matches the things that you like to do and the things that you're good at. As basic and simple as it sounds, the matching model. And Holland got real specific about it, and he came up with a model that is still used widely today. I mean, it hasn't been around for that long, but is the leading way that career counselors and the leading way that people generally choose careers. And even if you didn't go through Holland's theory, you probably chose your career based on this model anyway. So let's explain it. Holland's theory says that there are 6 different personality types, more or less, and 6 different types of work environments, and they match up. There are 6 of them, and we can use the acronym REASEC. This is a good acronym to remember them. The first one starts with R, second one I, and so on. I'm going to quickly go through each of these, and as I talk about them and describe them, I'd like for you to think about which of these, and usually there's a couple of them, describe you pretty well, and then think about which of them really are not like you. So we'll start with the R, and that's short for the realistic type, the realistic personality type. And these are people that like to use their hands for work. They like practical, hands-on kind of occupations. They concrete, I don't mean literally concrete, but they like to work with things, for example. So compatible jobs would be construction, engineering, farming. Those are just a couple of examples. Things like interior design, sewing, those would be realistic kinds of occupations. And someone has come up with one-word descriptions for each of these types, which I think are really handy. And this one is the doer. These are people that like to be outside doing things. Okay, the investigative type, lots of psychologists are investigative. These are people who like to solve problems. They like to think about issues, they're curious, they generally like science and reading about new information, they're logical, so they oftentimes will go into the sciences, computers, math, any of the social sciences would certainly count, and these are the thinkers. They like to think about issues and problems. The social type, these are people that value using their verbal and social skills. They generally really like working with people in those kinds of settings. They like to communicate, just much more people-oriented. So clearly they would go into things like teaching, counseling, ministry, and these are the helpers. So for example, teaching isn't necessarily considered a helping profession, but really you're helping educate someone. The artistic people, these aren't necessarily people that can draw and paint and write, but it can be, but they also really appreciate those gifts. These are people that like to use their imagination. They are just generally more intuitive and creative, much more expressive. So of course, any kind of design, painting, writing, theater, music, any of the arts certainly would be considered, but you know, industrial designers, mechanical engineers, all those people have artistic parts to them too, because they emphasize creativity. So these are the creators. The enterprising type, these are people that they have some similarities to the social type. They generally do like working with people and value social skills, but they are more likely to be in leadership kinds of positions. They like persuading people to do things. They're oftentimes entrepreneurs, like to start their own business. So these people generally do well in sales and management kinds of positions, politics, starting their own business, like I said. These are the persuaders. And then the last category, these are the conventional people, and these are folks that like routine, they like organization and structure in their job. They oftentimes will like working with facts and data more so than working with people. It doesn't mean they don't want to work with people, but they just like figures and data. So oftentimes they'll go into any kind of banking or accounting or clerical sorts of jobs. And these are the organizers. That's what we consider them to be. Now, for a little bit more information, on the next couple of slides, I've just got pictures and graphs you can take a look at. And again, I want you to think about which of these categories, pick one or two that you think you would be the highest in, and then pick one or two that you think you would be really low in. So I will post these. I mean, you can stop the video right here and take a look at these. I encourage you to do that and see what you are high in. I'm the highest in social, and I've got a pretty high conventional score also. I have 0 R. We sometimes will call them by the first letter R. I have 0 R. So maybe you're, obviously you are going to be different. But down here, I like this, prefers to deal with. So realistic likes to deal with things, investigative ideas and things, ideas and people for artistic, people for social, data and people for enterprising, and data and things for conventional. So that can be a clue. This next slide, again, pause the video and take a look at this. Just gives you a little bit more information about the 6 different types. And I will tell you that on the final exam, those of you that are taking the final exam, one of the questions involves these 6 types. So just prepare yourself and also make sure that you have an understanding of what you think you are. Now, if we were meeting in class, I would give you a test to do to find out. And there actually are tests online. So if you look this up, you can take a Google test online. I just didn't want to give you one more assignment right now at the end of the semester, but it's interesting to do. Now, when we look at these 6 themes, they're generally involved in a 1, 2, 6, what is this, hexagon, octagon, not octagon, hexagon, I think. They're arranged here intentionally. So it's the RIASEC. The areas that are closest to each other are the most similar. So realistic and conventional people are similar to each other. Artistic and social people are similar. Artistic and investigative people. But the ones that are opposite are the most different. So social people tend to be different than realistic people. So I just told you R is like my opposite. Investigative people are different than enterprising. Artistic are very different than conventional. That is not a bad thing. It's just a difference here. So when you take a test to find out what your types are, we're interested in how close together are your top 2. So if your top 2 are social and artistic, then those are pretty similar personality types, and the jobs are much more similar. Excuse me. On the other hand, hold on. Now, the one thing to keep in mind is if your top 2 are opposite each other or very different, but your scores are really close. So maybe your score on the social scale is really high and your score on the realistic scale is high. Sometimes those folks have trouble picking a career because these are very different kinds of jobs. There aren't too many jobs that combine the artistic and the conventional, or the realistic and the social. So sometimes when we have students who score very opposite, we see some difficulties with that. So just something to keep in mind. Okay, I think that's about all I wanted to say about Holland's theory. So there's one other theory, just to kind of conclude this chapter, one other theory I want to talk about that we certainly do use in career counseling, but it doesn't necessarily translate easily into particular techniques. It's more of an overarching theory to guide you when you're doing career counseling. And that is a psychologist named Donald Super, and he came up with a really good developmental theory that I think can serve as a good backdrop for career counseling. His theory essentially says, and it's not so different than Holland's, it's about knowing yourself and understanding yourself, that we need to implement our self-concept with a career that permits self-expression. So we pick a career that allows for us to express ourselves, express our talents, and express our abilities. So there aren't really tests that go along with this, but there are several stages that I want to go over because I think it can guide career counseling at really any age. So to get more specific here, there's 2 key ingredients of his theory. The first one is that he says that there are a series of lifelong stages with respect to career, and they each involve a particular vocational task. So for example, when you're a teenager, you're not expected to know exactly what you want to do when you get older. What you are expected to do is to engage with your studies, to perhaps be thinking a bit about the future. That's really the extent of it. So we'll talk in more detail about that. So each stage has a vocational task. And then the second part of this is that self-concept implementation comes out in our work. And that's kind of like congruence. So if you really believe, if you are a giver, if you are a teacher, if you're an instructor, if that's how you see yourself, and that's the kind of job that you do, that really comes out with that. So if you are able to put your gifts and your abilities and your interests into your work, you would meet this second criteria. If these occur, then Super talks about how this is career maturity, when there is congruence between the stage that you should be in and mastery of that particular task. So the example I gave, a 16-year-old is not expected to be certain about what they want to do, but they are considered to be mature if they're engaging in their schoolwork and thinking a bit about the future. Okay, so let's just kind of quickly go through these stages. And again, remember, this is more the backdrop for counseling rather than things that you would go through step by step. Now, the ages are also going to be off on this. This theory is a little bit older, I think from the 60s. So the fact that more kids are going to college and postponing career decisions and actually postponing family life, that changes a little bit. So the first stage is pretty on target, but the rest of them are skewed somewhat. So 0 to 16, okay, birth to 16, this is the preparatory period, and this involves just having all the early experiences that you have when you're a young kid, the play and the sports and the home and the school. And toward the end of this period, you really start having a better understanding of what you like and what you don't like. So maybe you like structure, you like guidance in what you do, you don't like uncertainty, you don't like surprises, maybe you know that you like planning things, you don't like using your hand, that kind of thing, just really general. You do like math, you don't like art. So that's about where you're expected to be career mature. Now, the second stage, 16 to 18, and I really would stretch this into the 20s because this was really formed more in an age where not as many kids went to college. A lot of kids just worked after high school. So just think about that. This is when you gain skills necessary for jobs. Well, unless you're going to a vocational or tech school, you're not so much doing that in high school. But your aspirations as a career start to become more realistic. So you may realize that even though you'd like to become a physician, you don't want to go to school for that long. Or, I'd like to become an astronaut, but maybe not, or I'm too tall or whatever. Kids are moving away from thinking they want to be a professional athlete or an actor. And you are anticipating entry into higher education or the workforce. The third stage, the trial period, and I would really reset these ages as more, some people go to work after high school, of course, but anywhere from 18 to 22 into the 40s, I would say, at least, this trial period. This is when you seek and obtain your first job and you start to develop a stable work environment. You enter into a stable work environment, and you may go through numerous jobs through this period until you finally hit on something you like. Lots of people bounce around, lots of people stay in the same occupation and just go to different jobs. So the trial period is meant to be kind of an experimental period. Figure out what you want to do, where you want to land. For women, this may extend longer if they are having children. This is kind of the prime age for childbearing, of course, and so that may extend longer, especially if they decide to stay home with their kids and then go back to work after they are a little bit older in school. And finally, the stable period, which Super says is anywhere from, let's come up here, 35 to retirement. Of course, I think that that age range could be very wide, but this marks job persistence. So you've found your spot, you've found your niche, and you're just kind of working your way up if that's your goal. And this does extend into retirement or until you re-enter the job market. So it's during this time when people will sometimes decide, hey, this isn't for me, I want to do something else. I expect we are going to see a lot of this after, we've just got so many people out of work, and I expect that once the economy reopens and things start to change, we'll see a lot of people not able to go back to their previous career or decide to make a shift as a result of this. So my personal suspicion is that career counseling is going to be very much in demand here in the next few years. So lots of people are going to be in this stable period, and then they kind of drop back and recycle through. But the overall result of Super's theory here is that you have a preparation plan for career that involves evaluating your resources, what you can do, what you're able to do, searching, looking at different opportunities, and then obtaining a position. Now, not everybody goes this route. There are people who know from the time they're knee-high to a grasshopper what they want to do, and so they don't have to go through that exploration. And some people get a job when they're 18 and then they retire in that same job. But in general, his theory is meant to give credence to how career counselors work and the life cycle of careers to think about.